only recommendation is to hear an update. So
I'll move to receive and file.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to receive and file. Roll call vote.
Councilmember Meyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Percival?
yes.
Councilmember Wright?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Krupa?
Yes.
Mayor Brown?
Yes. The receive and file passes unanimously.
Thank you, council.
Thank you, Lorena. Moving on to item 10E, an update on fiscal year 2020-2021 budget process. City Manager Lopez.
Thank you, Mayor. So, you know what they say about plans, right? So this, when we last talked in March, we had set aside today to talk about the budget. The initial plan was to provide some policy options for the council, but obviously with COVID-19 really messing everything up, we've had to readjust, and so we're being flexible and fluid here with this dynamic situation. So today is an update on the process that we've taken so far, as well as some key milestones, as well as some policy questions that we anticipate the council to weigh in on in the near future. So as background, on January 28, 2020, the staff provided a financial model update to the mayor and the city council. That model really showed and projected out what our fiscal condition would be in the next few years. And so you can see in the graph, every single time you have a purple arrow, that's where your revenues or your expenditures are higher than your revenues, meaning that structural deficit. So coming into this initial fiscal year 2020-2021 budget cycle, we projected, and this is pre-COVID-19 revenues, we projected an over $5 million deficit for this fiscal year. Part of that obviously is due to some labor costs that are out of our control, and obviously some PERS costs that are being passed down to obviously the city as well. The purpose of that model too was to show to the state auditor that we were doing our part, and they actually directed us or recommended that the city council receive a budget model before they adopt its fiscal year 2020-2021 budget. So that was the big push that we had done over the last 9 months, really focusing the team to take care of this financial model. And again, I can't thank the finance team enough, primarily under the direction of Lorena and her team, to develop this model, refine it, and really go from there. I should also point out that in fiscal year 1920, we do have a balanced budget, but that was made possible due to the utilization of a number of items, including the use of equipment replacement funds, the deletion of a number of positions in the non-safety side, as well as the use of Measure U funds for about $1.2 million in the general fund. So the approach that we laid out in March was as follows. All departments and divisions were provided a budget target, and that was the max or the ceiling that they had to adhere to for all maintenance and operations, as well as personnel costs. So in years past, there was a habit of having a rollover budget where costs were just rolled over, and there was no examination of those costs within the departments. What was clearly different in this budget is that departments and divisions are able to restructure their operations, but they have to justify every single line item and every single expenditure in their budgets. And we went through a methodical review with departments and divisions in that time. Departments were tasked with evaluating their existing operations and also providing information on their projected service levels and build their programs and their budgets from zero. So again, this concept of a rollover budget was completely blown out of the water, and we really challenged our departments and divisions to come up with solutions to our budget issue. Each department and division's budget was broken down by program and division, with all expenditures justified, and they were tasked with providing that information to the finance department, where we then reviewed that. So all departments and divisions submitted their preliminary numbers and budgets from the targets provided. Again, this is where things start going astray. The targets did not anticipate any of the COVID-19 impacts, as the budget directions were provided prior to COVID-19 closures and impacts to our businesses. The initial budget targets included reductions in FTE vacant positions. So what I mean is that as a result of the targets that were provided to staff, department heads and division managers needed to meet that target. And in many ways, the only ways that they were able to meet those targets was by reduction of FTEs, and primarily in vacant positions. And so divisions across our operation were forced to eliminate positions, rework their structures in order to accommodate the targets that were provided. But that was the only way that our operations were able to build their budgets, and we were anticipating a balanced budget with that. As a result of COVID-19 and the impacts that we're seeing to our local economy, all departments are now going to be required to revise their budgets based on the COVID-19 pandemic and the anticipated lower revenues that we're projecting to see for the remainder, one, of this year, but then also, two, for fiscal year 2020, 2021. So I first wanted to talk about fiscal year 1920, and that's the current budget year that we're in right now. We've gone through methodically every single line item. We've gone through the actual year-to-date revenues collected for our operations across the board, and we've revised our revenue estimates to reflect that. You can see that in the period from March until June 30th of this fiscal year, we're anticipating a reduction of $2.8 million in general fund revenues. That's significant. In addition to that, we're anticipating a reduction of $1 million in Measure U sales tax revenues for the next couple months. So that equates to an immediate impact on the City of Hemet's budget just for this current fiscal year that we're in of $3.8 million. So if we just think about this a little bit differently, we know that the fiscal year 1920 budget was adopted with approximately 75% of revenues allocated for public safety. So we are decreasing a projected decrease of $2.8 million of general fund revenues from March until June 2020, and an additional $1.0 million of Measure U revenues. So if we think about the reduction of, let's take the Measure U reduction of $1.0 million off the table for the discussion, and let's just focus in on the general fund revenues. We know that 75% of our revenues, of general fund revenues, are allocated to public safety. Yeah, that's me. Okay.
But I was testing for closed session.
Good. Okay. So let's take the general fund side of the discussion, and let's just focus in on that. If we know that 75% of our revenues for the existing fiscal year were allocated to public safety, we know that 75% of that $2.8 million, we know where those impacts are going to be. And those impacts are going to be in public safety. And so if we know that 75 cents out of every dollar goes to fund public safety operations in the City of Hemet, we know where the biggest impacts are going to be. And so I just really wanted to frame the conversation around that because it doesn't matter how you cut it, there's going to be some impacts to our operations as a result of the lowered revenues that we're anticipating moving forward. Last week we had a Measure U meeting, and one of the committee members mentioned that auto sales were down significantly, more than the statewide average, upwards of 70% reductions in sales tax. I mentioned that because our auto dealerships are in the top tier every single year of our sales tax generators. So any impacts to those operations will significantly impact our revenues moving forward. So we've got an immediate problem that we have to tackle, and that is the tackling of the fiscal year 1920 budget, or the existing budget year that we're in right now. So in order to combat the lowered revenues that we know will be coming our way, we've done a number of items to help lessen those impacts. We've slowed our recruitments, particularly in the police department. We had a number of individuals that were going through the process. We've placed a pause on that. And we've done that because we don't have a great idea of how things are going to end up 3 months from now, 6 months from now, or 9 months from now. And so in the best interest of everybody involved, including these applicants, we really wanted to pause this, reassess it in a couple months, and figure out what's going on before we start moving too quickly on items and then have to pull back on some of that. So that's why we've taken a slower approach. All other positions are on a case-by-case basis, which includes non-general fund positions. Obviously, with individuals being laid off and unemployment being the way that it is, we do anticipate lowered revenues in other non-general fund areas, for instance, our water utility. And so we are also looking methodically at those operations as those vacancies arise, and we are having conversations about what is the ability for us to bring those on board. For critical items, in addition to public safety, sewer, water, we're moving forward on those positions because we do have some critical needs that we do have to address. Collectively, across the board, we're eliminating non-critical purchases. There's a number of items that have not gone before the council, because we feel that they are not critical. You'll note that the radio system was brought forward to council at the last council meeting. That is an absolutely critical item. In calendar year 2019, we had a number of instances where our communications failed. Our police officers were unable to communicate with one another. Our firefighters were unable to communicate with one another. That is a critical life, officer safety, firefighter safety issue that we needed to put forward, and that's why it was brought forward to the council.
And it was fixed last year, correct, for $10,000?
It's a temporary fix.
But it was working fine through the rings?
I can't take the risk of it failing again in the future.
But it could work for 20 more years, we don't know.
That's a risk that I'm not willing to take right now. In addition to that, we have utilized overtime only for critical uses within public safety, and primarily the police department has made some significant changes in their operation to really focus in on what are those areas that are critical so that we limit our overtime, particularly in the police department as well. The key takeaway from this is our agency must be nimble and flexible right now to deal with our existing reality. That's one of the key points that a lot of people don't really acknowledge governments as being quick and nimble. We're a smaller agency, and our ability to implement some of these changes, I feel with a smaller agency we're able to accomplish some of these tasks. And so I feel that we've set up some real solutions to deal with our current existing realities. And again, I should add that reductions and changes now are done in order to prevent more drastic measures in the future. Now, I can't promise that there aren't going to be more drastic measures in the future, just because I don't know how it's going to end up, and I have an idea of what these revenues are going to be. But I would be doing a disservice to you all and the community if I came in and painted a rosy picture of what we expected things to be in an overly optimistic scenario. That doesn't do anybody any benefit. So now let's talk about fiscal year 2020-2021. In the general fund, we anticipate a $2.7 million reduction in revenues. In Measure U, we anticipate a $1.0 million reduction in Measure U revenues, for a total of $3.7 million in fiscal year 2020-2021. So we are projecting a decrease of 2.7 in the general fund for fiscal year 2020-2021, and we expect Measure U revenues to decrease by $1 million in the same time frame. So when we prepared our preliminary budgets that were based on targets that were pre-COVID-19 revenue numbers. I wanted to provide some information to the council and the community into a glimpse into some of those challenges that we were addressing prior to COVID-19. The preliminary estimates based on the targets that were provided to all departments and public safety in particular, there will be, and this is the policy level decision for the council that you all will need to grapple with in the next couple months. Preliminary estimates showed that over $2 million in new Measure U expenditures would need to happen in fiscal year 2020-2021. And so what I mean by that is the City Council is going to have to dip into its Measure U fund balance to offset the additional expenditures that were not available to be funded out of the general fund. That does not incorporate the reductions that we anticipate for fiscal year 2020-2021. So that only incorporates the targets that were provided pre-COVID-19 impacts. So we can probably, we're probably in a safe position to say that that dollar amount is only going to increase. Again, 75% of our current fiscal year's budget is rooted in public safety. So if our general fund revenues have now decreased, and we anticipate by a significant amount in just a couple of months, you know where those reductions or those offsets are going to have to happen. And so that's why it's so important to remain flexible with Measure U in order to be able to accomplish some of those policy level items that the council may want to consider moving forward. Again, public safety will propose to allocate additional expenses to Measure U in light of new revised revenue estimates. So the council can expect to see a higher allocation of expenditures that were never in Measure U from public safety to now be borne by and bared by Measure U. I should also remind the council that Fire is allocated 1/3 of Measure U revenues, and PD is allocated 2/3 of Measure U revenues, and that's per the resolutions that were adopted by the mayor and the city council. I can also say that the council can expect to see consolidations of various operations. So what we mean by that is in operations where we have divisions that are separate and apart and standalone, we're going to be looking at bringing in operations together and consolidating them. Again, this is in order to lower our expenditures, identify some savings, and we think provide a better level of service to the community. So on the non-general fund side of the aisle, we're having to rework existing operations there as well. We're having to reduce deficit spending in public works operations. So we are looking to make adjustments to ensure viability of restricted funds. And so for the last couple of years, beyond the last couple of years, some operations in public works have been utilizing fund balance to keep personnel operations moving forward. We are now in a position, as a result of the lower revenues that we're anticipating receiving, to not be able to meet those obligations. And so we are looking at what are the options that we have to fill vacancies, move some positions around, and essentially provide level of service to the community. Now, it may be a different level of service to the community, but in order to keep our fiscal house in order and not have those restricted funds then become a burden on the general fund, we're having to address those things right now. In addition to that, we've heard loud and clear from the council that customer service is of the utmost priority. So we are prioritizing customer service and water utility operations to help accommodate the items that come up on a day-to-day basis with respect to the water utility function in the city of Hemet. So again, I touched on these a couple slides back. The policy options for the council in fiscal year 2020-2021, the council may want to consider the use of its emergency reserves for non-reoccurring expenses. We're going to do our best to live within our means and see if we can minimize that and not put in jeopardy the use of all that emergency funds, but that may be something that we present to the council. In addition to that, the council is going to have to consider the use of Measure U funds to make up the difference in the public safety revenue decrease to keep those individuals here employed by the city of Hemet. And then finally, the council could also consider service reductions in lowering its expenditures. So just to put things into context, in just 15 months, we anticipate a reduction of revenues of $7.5 million. This includes general fund and Measure U revenues, and that is pretty significant. I know Lorena and I have spent some time looking at the recession in 2008 and 2009, and the amount of reduction that we're seeing over the next 15 months is far greater than any single 15-month period that we saw during that time. So these are truly unprecedented times. And so for us, when we looked at the recession, when we analyzed that scenario, there was a series of multiple years of reductions over the course of a number of years that ultimately lowered the budget to where it ended up being. We're seeing a huge decrease in a short amount of time, and that's why this is truly unprecedented for the city of Hemet and the region and the United States. So the new budget calendar, the revised budget calendar, we had our Measure U meeting on April 23rd. At that meeting, I provided this in your council update. I provided the overview of the financial model that we presented to the mayor and the city council. We also went over the budget process that we've taken so far. And we also fielded a number of questions about some of these policy level questions that really get at the fact of, how are we going to make do with our new reality? And so the really good, robust conversation. I know that they appreciated the work that both chiefs provided. I know the work that Lorena put in and her team. And so I think we spent probably over 2.5 hours talking to them about these items. Today is the council budget workshop, the update that we provided, or that we are providing right now. We're anticipating, we had initially said that we were going to do a budget workshop on May 12th. We're going to push that out to May 26th to see how the local economy, whether there's any change in the county health directive order, whether there's any change to the governor's order. That's really going to dictate how we refine our numbers, how we refine our projections, and really how we're able to package up the budget for the mayor and the city council. Council budget workshops, we'd like to see if the council can be as flexible as possible to deal with how everything is changing right now. Again, we want to make sure that we're not rushing anything, so we want to get as much information as we can from our consultants. We want to get as much information as we can from our large businesses in our community, as well as our smaller businesses in the community. I failed to mention that hotels are a significant part of our revenue as well, so I know that their revenues are down significantly as well, their occupancy. And so we don't want to rush anything. We really want the council, would like the council to be flexible with us so that we can get as much information as we can and really allow us to process the information. And I think Councilmember Krupa made the point that with RCTC that there's probably going to be some budget amendments. That may be the case for us moving forward too. We may have to refine, we may need to revise the budget for fiscal year 2020, 2021 based on how the local economy and even the state goes with some of these orders. And again, we will coordinate additional council meetings or Measure U meetings as needed to deal with the current reality and also information that comes through and the information that we're getting. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, receive any input that the council may have. Lorena is also here too to answer any questions, and we're happy to address anything that the council might have to say.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. I know that was an unpleasant report to have to provide, but I appreciate your and the finance director's candor in presenting the situation so that we have a good understanding of what the city's facing. For the record, public comments for this item, there was an opportunity to provide that during item 5, communications from the public. Do any members of the council have comments or questions? Question? Linda?
Good job. Depressing job, but a good job. Question on the original budget targets when you were before COVID-19. Did that represent a balanced budget when departments came back with the targets you had given them?
So that's a really good question. We're still making changes, and I can say that there were a couple operations that were unable to meet their target. The plan was going into it, if everybody adhered to their target, we would have had a balanced budget. Now, for the operations that went over, then obviously the next step would be refining those numbers and seeing what that difference is with the targets that were given. And that was where we were at last week. But now with everything changing so much, a lot of that work has kind of been blown out of the water. But I don't think that work is necessarily done. I think where we go from here is we essentially determine what our delta is with the revenue projections for this new fiscal year, the expenditures that were provided by all of our departments and our divisions, figuring out what that delta is, and that becomes the reduction that we need to make for this fiscal year. And so the biggest chunk of that is public safety, obviously. And so the good thing about that is there's a revenue source, Measure U, that we could essentially tap into to utilize to keep those allocations there. But I should mention that even with the targets that were provided pre-COVID, there were a number of vacant positions in terms of the police department that were going to have to be unfunded or have Measure U fund them. Now we're talking about adding additional positions beyond that to make it work. The other thing that I wanted to provide to the council too is I've made it clear to the executive team, and I think Lorena and I both think that this is the best idea and the best item to present. We want to be able to show to the council that if there's an offset of Measure U revenues or Measure U funding that's utilized to fund public safety operations, we want the council to be in a position to see that in year 2, in year 3, in year 4, that you're able to sustain those operations. The last thing that we want to do is have a situation where we have, and everyone likens the SAFER grant, where you have the funding for a couple years and then it's gone. That's the last situation that we want to be in. So the last thing we want to do is say, oh yeah, it's great, everything's good, we're using $4 or $5 million in fund balance, that'll get us through 1 or 2 years, and then at the end of year 2, there's even tougher decisions to make. So we want to make sure that the council has the financial model that's been updated with those, the new offsets that we would ask or request that the council funds through Measure U. Obviously, that would go to the Measure U committee too. But we want to make sure that we are transparent, that the council has all the information, all the financial information, so that it knows that it is not going to potentially jeopardize future employees for the city of Hemet. We want to be as transparent as possible when this comes before the council.
I appreciate that very much, and being transparent as possible, it's also being realistic as possible. So thank you. I really appreciate the work you're doing so far, even though I haven't seen a lot getting of the numbers, but just the process of this is your target, this is our reality, this is what we have to live with. So thank you very much for that.
What a difference a quarter makes. 6 months ago, things were looking really on the upside, and the economy was great, certainly greater, a lot greater than it is now. It's not easy decisions to make. It affects everybody. It affects staff. It affects certainly having to go in a direction that we wish we didn't have to go. But I applaud you for your management and staff's management on this issue and what is in the best interest of the city on a number of levels. So appreciate that, and as Linda said, good work. And I know that it hasn't been easier, and it's going to get tougher. So I want to thank the staff, not only management staff, but all those involved in city staff with what we're going to all have to look at in the next year. So we thought we were moving up that mountain, and unfortunately, situations caused us not to be able to reach that top. So I know that other cities are going through the same thing. We're not unique in this by any means, and management decisions, you got a tough job. And but I appreciate your due diligence on coming to the conclusions that you have, and support you 100%.
Thank you. Michael?
Where to begin? Thanks for the presentation. Like Bonnie just said, that last quarter everything was going gangbusters, and the economy was roaring, and everybody was moving, and unemployment was low, and now there's 16 million plus new in the last couple weeks, new filings for unemployment, and businesses are shut down at the sole direction of government. And based on bad decisions and bad data and bad information. We knew what we knew at the time, but now this is ever evolving with what we're learning and from a medical standpoint, and how this virus lives and how it transfers, and we're still going day by day like we have the same information 2 months ago when we have new information, and we're not making any changes based on that new information. I want to say that I applaud the Orange County Board of Supervisors, because they said we're going to open for business. From what I read, Riverside County is taking this up tomorrow to see whether or not they're going to open for business. But this when the government mandates, and I'll say the state, when the state mandates that you have to shut down for business and, quote, non-essential businesses have to close, I have an argument that every business is essential to the person performing it, because they have a roof to keep over their head and food to keep on their table. So whatever business they're in or whatever job they're doing, it's essential to them, just like every job that we're all doing is essential to us. So in my take, every job is essential, and those jobs bring tax revenue. And that's how we're having this major impact on our budget. I say we go after the state of California and say, hey, you need to shore up our budget shortfalls because you caused this. I want to say that we've done the best we can, especially to shelter our employees. I think we've done a pretty good job. The problem is our employees still have jobs, and there's a lot of people out there that don't have jobs. And so everybody is impacted by this, and I think everybody needs to play along until this can get rectified. And I think that we need to open for business too. And it's not a mandate to open for business, but give people the option to be able to open for business. If somebody says, I don't feel safe enough to go out, nobody's saying you have to go out. You can stay home and you can continue to quarantine, but give the businesses and the people that want to get out and want to work the option to do that, so that they can then provide that revenue that our city will then generate. And then we won't have this massive budget deficit that we're going to have to continue to make hard decisions on. We're all in this together, is what I keep hearing. So if we're all in it together, then we all need to be in it together. And that includes all of our employees, That includes all of our residents, all of our transients, the people that transit through Hemet. We're all in this together. And so the sooner we can get our businesses back open and people up and running and use the precautions that each individual feels they need to have for themselves, that'll get our economy going back in Hemet, and people will start buying and paying sales tax. And that will help our budget problems. I'll get off my soapbox. But I still believe that if people feel that they need to stay self-quarantined, then they have the right to do that, just like the next person has the right to open their business and go to work and use the precautions to keep each other safe. I mean, we're all in this together.
Just for clarity, we haven't had to furlough anyone, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thanks.
Harley?
Well, I have a lot to say about this. First of all, I feel like you were less than honest with us last meeting. You put something on the agenda, a $600,000 item that will come back with another $300,000, and I'm referring to the microwave radio system, just to, at the end of the meeting, say that we're in dire straits and we need to cut budgets. If we were in dire straits, then you don't spend that much money. And I understand what you're saying about you aren't willing to take the risk. We didn't hear a professional opinion on the longevity of that new piece that was fixed on that radio. And when there is an emergency, and when our city doesn't have money, allocating another $1 million to a radio system, which now we're committing to new radios, which will be another expense, was less than honest. And waiting to the end of the meeting to do that, let us spend, and then say it. That's nice. Now, we can keep plugging little holes of leaks that are just squirting out, and we can pick off firefighters, and you didn't have to be the mayor and stand up in Weston Park and call for war on crime so that we can still have a zero balance. We're not changing anything. We're not reducing anything. We're still where we are. And council members, we have got to be careful what we do with this Measure U money. We all took an oath right up here to the people that we were going to spend it on public safety.
And that's what it's being spent on.
Right, and if it is going to into the general fund as part of something that we did not, I mean, we promised boots on the ground, we have a plan. And somebody needs to email Mr. Gosh the plan that was advocated. I thought he was on the committee. But we have a specific plan.
But anything we use as Measure U, even for the deficit, is for public safety. It's not for our
I get
general
it.
fund
I
expenditures.
understand. But we're still essentially not keeping our word. We declared a war on crime. So what's going to happen to our crime rates if we start down this road? We have got to make sure that we are balanced. Our projections right now have been less than accurate. How many people are supposed to be dead right now in Riverside County? Has anybody been keeping track from the beginning? We're 6 weeks in, and they made major projections. We have not hit those. So while it is good, we have got to make sure that we stay balanced and we address issues that are major issues. And I hate to pick on you again, Eric, but $2.2 million for our city attorney. That's how much we're spending. We have $5 million next year on retiree medical. I've gone over the contract. That contract is so locked tight that I don't know how we are not even allowed to go to bid for a comparable service without breaking the contract. How did that ever pass? Those, I'm talking about retiree medical.
We've already went down that path, though.
We could be paying,
We're able to change them, Carly.
and we're going to be up to $5 million next year. $5 million for people that aren't here. I think that we can get better, and we could probably pay half for the same excellent service that we promised. We haven't tried hard enough, and we want to pick off and nickel and dime and do all these things, but these are big ticket items that we're not talking about. And Mr. Gosh says that we need to be leaders and we need to talk about the hard things. Let's talk about the hard things. A cop here, a firefighter there. I mean, that's, $150,000. What about the big items?
Well, it's not our fault that CalPERS goes up every year like it does. Is it? I mean, it's not
We're
our
sitting
fault.
here
We have
making
to deal with
decisions,
it.
but we still have to make decisions what's best for us. What about the well that we are paying rent on at Searle Park? They didn't like the deal, so they came back in 91 and said, we're going to sue you or of some sort, and they made us re-up. So now Valley-wide gets to pay water rates that are 2/3 of the cost of what the citizens of Hemet pay. Is that legal? I read the contract. We're paying to wheel it to their other properties on the backs of the people. We're not making hard decisions. These are easy decisions that he's doing. Take it out of Measure U. We have some real issues. We have some real things that we need to work on to save real money.
Well, when you come up with all the answers, you can let us know.
If I could get information without doing a PRA, I could. And what was it like? We're small, so we're quick and we're easy, and we can move fast if you want to.
I'll respond to a couple items.
Sure.
First off, with all due respect, council member, I'm not dishonest with the council, so I don't appreciate that comment. being
Well, it was
taken.
not forthcoming.
It was in the staff report, the information provided to the
After you
council.
let us spend the money. That's what I said.
I think it's
Charlie,
absolutely,
allow him to respond, please.
I absolutely think that it's the most important item to protect the health and the safety of our public safety first responders. And so, while that solution that we have right now may work for another month, 2 months, 6 months, I can't take that risk. Now, I remember when that system went down and our first responders came to me and said, what are you going to do to fix this? And I vividly remember those conversations. And that was the perfect opportunity to deal with that. And so I stand by that recommendation, and it's something that we needed to do to protect our police officers and our firefighters, and I still stand by that. In addition to that, these decisions are not, in terms of the budget, that's going to come to the council. The council is going to have the ability to weigh in on that. And so the fact of the matter is that there are options that the council will have. I don't have them in front of you because I'm not asking for the decision on that. But they will come to the council, and I don't think that any of them will be easy decisions. I think they will all be very difficult decisions to make. And so I don't envy the position that any of you are in, because it's truly going to be a very difficult decision to make. And so the fact of the matter and the reality of it is we are in unprecedented times. This is not the situation that I expected to be in when we started this year. This isn't the expectation that I had when I came to the city of Hemet 2 years ago. And so unfortunately, that's just the reality of what we have. And so, again, I don't envy the position that you're in, but that's the fact of what we're dealing with. I think you brought up some really good points about some items that need to be addressed. And those are all items that we've talked about. One of the challenges that we do have is there's been a consistent changeover in city management. And so in order to build momentum, it takes a significant amount of leadership and the right people in the right positions to be able to effectuate those changes. A lot of these things don't happen overnight. They take months. They take allocated staff time to do that. And we don't have a robust bench.
I'd like to interject real quick, if I could.
We don't have the number of people that we have. And so that's one of the challenges that we have internally, but it's a systematic problem that the city of Hemet has had for a number of years.
I'd like to interject if I could. With that, you talk about leadership and good leadership. We all know, based on the revenue projections on where the revenue is going to be from our finance director based on actual conversations with the state officials that give us what our tax revenue projections are. Good leadership will bring nothing less than a balanced budget to this council, because the leadership has to make that hard decision and look at what their revenue projections are, and they need to base their budget based on those revenue projections. And that needs to come from our leadership to this council, nothing less than a balanced budget from all the department heads.
And that's what you're going to be getting from me. That's what you should expect.
Okay.
That's why I asked about the targets.
Did you have anything further?
Nope.
Well, I think what comments that have already been made, I appreciate the circumstances that we're facing. None of us envisioned, none of us had a crystal ball to know what the impact of this virus might be. And I'm certain that we all have our own opinions about whether it's state-induced or federal-induced or county-induced or exacerbated by all of the above. The fact of the matter is, it's the predicament that we're in. And being kind of at the end of the totem pole, again, I go back to my analogy of circle of influence and circle of concern. All of these things are in our concern, but we have to focus what we can do that we can actually influence. And I don't disagree with, some of the comments made earlier about how we find ourselves in this situation based on directives that we didn't control, that were imposed on us. And we don't have the ability to relax any of those things, so we have to absorb the punches. And I appreciate the fact that we're looking at alternatives, and you're not making recommendations yet. Carly brought up some good things that are worth examining, and if there's ways of saving expenditures that haven't been considered, that's what we expect of staff, is to bring viable alternatives to us that we can look at and give some policy direction to. But I do appreciate the fact that you're looking hard at this, and absolutely we have an obligation to bring forth a balanced budget. We thought it was going to be a different picture just a few months ago, and things were looking pretty promising. It was still going to be tight. We still had a structured deficit, but we were on the right path. And it's kind of like treading water, holding on to a bunch of weights, and just about the time you get a gulp of air, somebody says, "Here, hold these weights too." And that's kind of what it feels like. And I think the same situation applies to all municipalities. Hemet happens to be in probably a less enviable position than some of the more affluent communities that have a bigger reserve fund and a better stream of revenue. But again, we have to play the cards that we're dealt. So I appreciate staff's diligence. I wholeheartedly appreciate, and I know how difficult it is for management staff to have to go through their budget and figure out, and I know the overarching intent is to avoid personnel layoffs. It's difficult to have people in the pipeline that we were hoping to increase and enhance our services, but that's a much, more palatable way of approaching it than actually having to furlough employees. So I appreciate the fact that we're making a valiant effort to try to avoid those circumstances. So this doesn't require council motion or anything. It's a budget update, and thank you, City Manager, Director Lorena, for your report.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 10F, Resolution Bill 16-103, adopted by the Mayor and Council as Resolution 4734 on December 13th, 2016. We have a recommendation or receive a report on Resolution Bill 16-103. And the city manager, are you providing the report on this?
Yes, I am, Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
So at the last council meeting, April 14th, the council directed the city manager to consult with legal to discuss Resolution 4734 and determine whether the city would violate this resolution with any planned action that it would take. In addition, the council also directed that this resolution be brought back at its next council meeting. I should also note that the reference was Resolution Bill number 16-103. The past practice here at the City of Hemet was to give resolutions a resolution bill number prior, or when it went to the council, and then once council adopted that resolution, it would get a formal number. And so it came in as Resolution Bill number 16-103, but it was formally adopted as Resolution 4734. So the staff had a chance to look at this resolution, as well as a number of other resolutions. We consulted with the city attorney as well. And 4734 is titled a resolution of the City Council of the City of Hemet, California, amending the budget and approving appropriations for the fiscal year commencing July 1, 2016 and ending June 30th, 2017. So essentially that's the title of the resolution. And I'll just go through the staff report. That resolution is also included in the agenda backup, and so it is included for your reference. This resolution allocated funding as a budget amendment since the budget for fiscal year 16-17 was adopted without funding for Measure U. So this was a timing issue that occurred. When the budget was adopted, it was adopted for that fiscal year probably in May or June of that same year, before the election before the voters had a chance to vote on Measure U. And so in November, as a result, the voters approved Measure U, and so the city manager needed authority to essentially expend those revenues, and so this budget resolution was needed to help allocate that funding, the revenue, and the expenditure. The expenditures approved within the resolution were set to expire on June 30th, 2017, or at the end of the fiscal year. At that time, a new budget would have been approved by the mayor and the city council with potentially different expenditure allocations and different action plans. So what I mean by that is in every year, the council has the opportunity to weigh in on the budget each year. Within that budget, it's one of the most important items that a council will take on in any year are the expenditure allocations for that given year. That includes the number of personnel within the departments, the number of dollars associated with bags of concrete, dollars associated with certain paving materials, number of street light repairs that are anticipated for that fiscal year. And so all those items are embodied within the budget that the council does adopt. Based on the detail within Resolution 4734, some of the expenditures have already been pre-programmed in subsequent budget years due to changed priorities. So when that Resolution 4734 was adopted by the council, at that time that was the plan and that was the action plan for that time for the budget. Subsequent to that, there have been a number of changes that have been embodied within various subsequent budget resolutions, and so that resolution itself includes expenditures that are no longer happening throughout the organization due to changed council priorities. The mayor and council approved adopted budget resolutions for fiscal year 16-17, fiscal year 17-18, and fiscal year 18-19, as well as fiscal year 19-20 have been attached for your reference. Each resolution is different based on the revenues and expenditures projected for the respective fiscal year, and also changes based on council priorities. So, for instance, we can assume that the fiscal year 19-20 budget will not be the same budget resolution that gets adopted for fiscal year 2020-2021 due to change in revenues, expenditures, so on and so forth. The mayor and the city council may adjust the respective fiscal year budget throughout various times of the year, and has done so. The council last adjusted the fiscal year 19-20 budget in its mid-year report on February 11, 2020, The resolution for these changes is found within resolution number 2020-012 and is attached for reference. So this resolution authorized additional general fund appropriations in the following areas. And the table includes $900,000 of general fund additional overtime to be funded through Measure U fund balance, an additional $250,000 of additional overtime for the fire department out of Measure U fund balance, an additional $20,000 in peak demand overtime out of Measure U fund balance, the allocation of a HR analyst for public safety taken out of Measure U fund balance, costs associated with new employee training out of Measure U fund balance, additional equipment costs for new employees as well, one general fund non-safety allocation, or I should say two, one for the city clerk for municipal code codification expenses, as well as an increased plan check expense for community development with offsetting revenue. So that was no net change to the general fund budget. So those additions total about $1.3 million, and the council did approve those budget amendments on February 11, 2020. So in the fiscal year 1920, council adopted budget resolution 4877, titled A Resolution of the City Council of the City of Hemet, adopting the budget and approving appropriations for the fiscal year commencing on July 1, 2019 and ending June 30th, 2020. Section 5 of the resolution states the following: the city manager may reduce expenditure appropriations within funds as a method of fiscal control, and the finance director may decrease revenue estimates to reflect economic change during the fiscal period. So, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic that we're dealing with, a number of these items have been paused. I'll give you one example in particular, the HR analyst using Measure U fund balance. We want to provide as much flexibility with the council to really prioritize public safety expenditures, so we're choosing to hold on that allocation so that we don't tie up some additional funding. Again, we want to be flexible with the council and provide that option to the council moving forward. So there are a number of items within there that we have paused given the current economic condition. So this budget resolution is also attached for your reference. Based on review of Resolution 4734 and the subsequent budget resolutions, actions conducted to reduce expenditure appropriations as a method of fiscal control are congruent with the council's adopted direction for staff. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. If Eric wants to add any additional comment, we're happy to answer any questions that the council might have.
Okay, and before we get to that, for the record, public comments opportunity for this was given under item 5 earlier in the evening, communications from public. So, does the city attorney have anything you wanted to add, or do you?
Mayor, I don't. I can provide additional comment or question. I did review the resolutions, Measure U, and some of the other documents at the time, so I'm familiar with the situation. But I think it's probably best if I just respond to your questions.
Okay. Members of the City Council have questions or comments for staff? Oh.
I do.
Carly?
All of that talking was great, but it didn't address the issues. So the point is in that resolution gave the fire engine staffing available for Station 5. That has not changed since. So therefore, it may expire every year. We are in the middle of a year right now. And if he wants to talk about the COVID, we do have a city ordinance about the powers and duties of the Director of Emergency Services. And if there are changes to be made financially, they are to be brought to council if it is an ordinance change at the next available meeting. This is our second meeting now that they knew of this plan without telling the council about it.
Are you talking about ordinance or resolution?
The resolution. But there is an ordinance on the giving direction to the Emergency Services Director. They can make changes in between meetings, but it must come back for a council vote at the next meeting.
But under ordinance, not a resolution.
On any changes. I mean, we made a policy decision that night, that day, that has carried over since. So there's many items